Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second spring webinar on Facebook as a research tool. We're really delighted to welcome Anna Kavalevitz, sorry for more or less, Annette from the University of Glasgow and Annette Peercoot from the University of Sheffield. They will pick up some of the topics we already covered last autumn when we talked about using Facebook to recruit research participants, and they will share their experience in using this tool, especially when we're trying to reach hard-to-reach groups. Their research very much focuses on migration studies, and for this, Facebook is an incredible, powerful, helpful tool. But of course, there's also always drawbacks, there's challenges to this kind of research, and this is what we're going to cover today. So as always, we will first give the floor to Anna and Annette to talk about their experiences. They have about kind of 40-45 minutes for this. If you have questions, please use the Q&A function. That's much easier for us to follow. Don't use the chat function. And then at the end, we will have time for Q&A. Given that there's two of you, maybe if there's some really obvious questions or just clarification, maybe you already want to answer some of these questions on the go. And then we will pick up maybe the more general, bigger questions at the end. Yeah? Okay, great. So then the floor is yours. So over to you.
Thank you, Anya, and thank you, ICUT, for having us here today. It's a pleasure and privilege to contribute to this excellent seminar series. So my colleague Annette and I will be discussing the use of Facebook to recruit, how to reach groups for research. And in doing so, we are drawing on our ongoing research project about migrant essential workers. Annette, could you please put on the next slide? So this project looks at the impacts of COVID on migrant essential workers by exploring a single case study of Polish essential workers in the UK. And there are many reasons why we're looking at this specific nationality. One of them being that this is the largest non-UK nationality in the UK, but there are other reasons too. If you're interested, we can discuss it in the Q&A. Please follow us on Twitter or like our Facebook page. We also have a website, so you can read more about the project over there. Next slide, Annette. Thank you. So this is our project team. We work across 3 universities in the UK, Glasgow, Sheffield and Middlesex. We also collaborate with non-academic partners in England and in Scotland. Next slide, please. So we'd like to start by explaining the term essential work. We've come up with this definition of essential work as a type of work that is really crucial, that is really key for keeping the society and economy running during the COVID-19 pandemic. And there are a number of sectors that fall into this category. We'll be looking at these sectors in a moment. One thing to clarify, we've been following UK government and Scottish government guidelines in including those specific sectors. Next slide, please. So our project consists of 2 components, a quantitative one, an online survey with Polish essential workers, and a qualitative one, which comprises interviews with Polish essential workers, as well as representatives of community and migrant organizations providing support to migrant workers in the UK. And in this talk, we're focusing on the quantitative bit, on the online survey, and specifically on recruiting participants for the online survey. Next slide, please. So let's look at the survey. We recruited for the survey in 2 stages, and there was no overlap between them because we really wanted to see the effectiveness of the Facebook ad campaigning. Initially, we did some convenience sampling for 7 weeks, and after that, we did a Facebook ad campaigning and a table shows you the survey fieldwork week by week. We used 2 language versions for the survey, English and Polish, because we were targeting specifically Polish essential workers. Next slide, please. And so we used different recruitment techniques to promote our survey, to reach out to survey respondents. First of all, as part of convenience sampling, we used our own social media. So we used our own project Facebook page, our project Twitter, our website. Simultaneously, we asked a number of stakeholders, the project partners, as well as other organizations, voluntary sector, charity organizations, to spread the word about our survey via their social media, as well as within their networks through newsletters, through direct emails. Finally, we also mobilized our own research networks. On top of that, we did Facebook ad campaign, and the results were really very impressive. As you can see, 66% of survey participants were recruited via Facebook ads and 34% via other channels. So this shows 2 things. It firstly shows the success of Facebook advertising, but secondly, it also shows the significance of trying to reach out to research participants via other channels at the same time. And the reasons we did that was to reach out to people who perhaps might not be using Facebook or might not be using it regularly, and to secure more diversity within our sample. The image on the right-hand side is just a screenshot of one of our Facebook posts where we promote the survey. You probably cannot see it, but it's dual language, English and Polish. It has been shared almost 100 times, and the post insights also show that there's been quite a lot of engagement with this post. Posting engagements are over 600, and we've managed to reach to 13,000, almost 13,000 Facebook users through a single post, and this is still part of the convenience sampling. So as I said, there's also a strength in using own Facebook social media channels and combining this with Facebook advertising. Next slide, Aneta, please. And this is again just a summary of where our survey respondents, how our survey respondents were recruited by, basically. So again, you can see a massive success of our Facebook ad campaign, but also you can see that we got quite a few respondents through Facebook convenience sampling, through partner organizations, our project website even, as well as other channels. We had to screen for eligibility simply because we were trying to reach out to a very specific group of Facebook users. So in order to take part in our survey, you would need to be Polish, to live in the UK for at least 3 months during the pandemic, and to work in one of the essential work sectors. So it's a pretty hard to reach population, not only because we're talking Polish migrants in the UK, but actually we're talking Polish migrants in the UK in a very specific sectors, very specific industries. Next slide, Aneta. Here's a list of the sectors that we were trying to reach out to. So as you can see, health and care, food and necessary products, production, processing, sales, delivery, utility services, transport, public safety, and so on. So these are the essential work sectors, and we were recruiting only within these sectors. So if participants did not felt that they did not work in any of these sectors and selected none of the above, they were not eligible to continue with the survey. And the final question in our survey would automatically take you to a separate mini survey where you could leave your email address, contact details to take part in a voucher draw, as well as potentially leave consent to take part in a follow-up qualitative research. And this was quite a success. Over 1,000 respondents left their emails to take part in the voucher draw, and over 600 agreed to be contacted for the qualitative study. So this was a massive success. This rarely happens in qualitative research, hardly ever, I must say. So we were in a very comfortable situation because we had over 600 people that were keen to take part in interviews. And of course, we have to disconnect personal data from the main survey. So we could not connect people's contact details with their responses in the survey. Next slide, Netta.
Yeah, I think I'll take over for a few slides now. So welcome, everybody. I'll introduce specification details of our Facebook ad campaign. For those of you who are familiar with the terminology, all things that are on the slide will be fairly clear, but on Facebook you have to define which population your ad, in this case the ad targeting people to take part in our survey. You have to specify how you know who these people are. So we use a couple of criteria. So first, the location they had to live now in the UK, but be in the past to live in Poland, and we wanted only people of the working age. The buying type is auction, I think the most frequently used by researchers, and the objective, which is how the algorithm learns who to display the ad, was based on a click. So people who were most likely to click were displayed, like similar people then later were displayed the ad as well. This has pros and cons discussed in the seminars before, so we can also touch up on it later in the discussion. Overall, we spent over almost £2,200, including a fee we had to pay for marketing company because we use University of Glasgow Facebook, which is managed by this marketing company. So it took some of our budget for the ads. But for the ads itself, we spent £1,718. But we started with a little bit smaller budget, not knowing exactly, you know, how the campaign will evolve and how much we will have to pay into the marketing company. We designed the campaign in a form of 6 ad sets. This is to make sure that we had a distribution across age groups, but also we wanted to have a substantial sample outside England because Polish migrants in the UK, I think 85% of them live in England. Then if we didn't use this separate ad set for regions like Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, probably we wouldn't have enough big samples in these regions. And then these 3 age groups roughly represent similar population of Polish people in the UK. Within these 6 ad sets, we used the same pictures, and there were 3 ads with different pictures as a start on the carousel, which I now will show you a couple of slides below. So just to explain a little bit more why we use these age brackets. So we look at the annual population survey and how the Polish population is distributed of this age, working age in the UK. We can again discuss whether this is the best representative source of the Polish migrants in the UK, but this is the largest study in England. At the time, we didn't have access to the census or any other larger administrative data on Polish migrants. So we thought that as the people in their 30s who are Poles in the UK are the largest group, we narrowed down a little bit the brackets for this ad set. Another question probably some of you would have, well, why haven't you used gender? But at the time we felt that it would spread our budget too thinly. We would have 12 ad set with we're not sure whether the campaign would pick up. And again, the priority was to have a big sample for Scotland and other regions. So back to you, Anna, to describe the design of our ad.
Thank you, Aneta. This is how the ad would look to a random Facebook user. So you can see the first thing that strikes you is that it comes from the University of Glasgow account. Aneta mentioned that we were working with an intermediary, a marketing company that manages this account. The ads were only in Polish because we were targeting Polish speakers, Polish migrants in the UK, but you have the translation on the right-hand side. We've put a lot of thinking into the design of this ad in terms of language use, in terms of images. We wanted to make sure that people are aware that we are targeting specific sectors. So there's a note on the image that we're really looking at selected industries. We didn't really manage to squeeze in more text, and we were advised against doing so. So the marketing company, our intermediary, advised us to use as little text as possible, which poses challenges in terms of, designing content. We used 5 different pictures in our ads. Can I have the next slide, Aneta? So these are the pictures that we use in the ads. And the selection of the pictures, again, we've put a lot of thought. So in our project, we were trying to reach out in the first place to people who are in precarious employment situation, people who work on 0 hours contracts, people who work on temporary contracts, people who might be on lower salaries. And this very often would overlap with lower skilled roles. But at the same time, we also wanted to reach out to Polish people working in essential work sector in more senior and more higher skilled roles. So hence the image of a female doctor, which we also used. But as I say, the aim of the project was to reach to the people in the most precarious circumstances, people who might face, who might experience precarity, who might experience discrimination in their work, and that were our reasons for selecting these specific images. Can I have the next slide, Aneta? And so, as you can imagine, Facebook users responded to our ad campaign in many different ways. There were we've identified 4 types of ways how people responded. So first of all, people engaged with our ads, engaged with the study. They would add some reflective comments beneath our Facebook ads. They were reflecting on their experience as essential workers, on their experience of working during COVID, working during lockdown. And these responses, these comments were pretty, quite neutral, quite reflective. However, equally, we also noted quite a lot of negative, critical comments under our ad campaign. And here we identified 3 types. There was a lot of misunderstanding of our Facebook ad campaign, unfortunately. And people complained that the ad represent Polish people in stereotypical and problematic ways. And that was the exact opposite of what we were trying to achieve. We were trying to reach out to people in precarious positions and to look at those experience of inequality, perhaps of discrimination, perhaps that they might be facing. Meanwhile, we were accused of using stereotypes. So this is just an example of misunderstanding. Can I have the next slide? This is the second type of negative responses that we noted. So our campaign mobilized people to discussing COVID as a pandemic, in broader terms. And we noted that this created space for conspiracy theories to flourish, for anti-vaxxers to spread, to spread misinformation about the vaccination program, for example. So these comments are actually in Polish, but you can imagine what type of comment these are. People are saying, oh, COVID doesn't exist, never existed. It's just one massive conspiracy to make people vaccinate. And this created a really unwanted space for conspiracy theories. Next slide, please.
I think I'm taking over now for longer. And for those of you who love, as I do, tables and graphs, there will be plenty of tables and graphs now. But for those of you who don't like them very much, I will summarize briefly, the key messages. So don't worry if you feel like, oh, there's so much information coming. But I think it's important to understand, what worked well, what could be as a lesson taken for another kind of the survey. So at the beginning, when you set up a campaign, Facebook tells you roughly what's the population on a Facebook of these users according to your variables you defined. And Poles who use living in UK, who used to live in Poland, it was roughly assessed by Facebook as 411,000 people, which we could say it's something at the time a year ago, maybe like a half of the population of Poles in UK, which was estimated over 800,000, I think, in 2021, and it's now a little bit dropping down. Most of these people were obviously in England, 350,000, and then a smaller population in the rest of the UK. So in the rest of UK, we managed with the budget we had to reach to more people. So in this table, in the first column, you can see this estimated by Facebook population. And then in a column, which is Reach Actual, has a title Reach Actual, is actually with the budget we had, how many people our campaign reached within each ad set. So altogether, we reached a quarter of Polish people on Facebook who were of working age, and much more within this rest of the UK category, which was 66% of them. They had an ad on their feed. Maybe they seen it, maybe they don't, we don't know, but it was much aggressive campaign over there. Quickly about the precision of the ad, because we use only region and age, less than 2% were misclassified. So comparing responses from participants, only one person who, according to Facebook, lived in England, they said they lived in Scotland, and 12 people who, according to Facebook, lived somewhere outside England, they said actually they lived in England in a questionnaire. There were some responses missing, but I excluded them from this calculation. And for the age, there was a little bit higher mismatch of 5%. You can see in these categories the actual responses of the respondent answer are these 3 blocks of graphs. And some mismatch is, it could be due the way we asked about the age, that we didn't ask directly about how old are you, but we asked about the birth year. So if I was responding to the questionnaire in March and someone asked me, how old are you? I would say, oh, I'm 39. But then when I was calculating this, subtracting 2021 from 1981, then my calculation would tell me that this was a 40 years old respondent. So I think this calculation is a bit lower if we ignore the neighboring categories. But overall, I think pretty good match precision on the region and age of this campaign. And referring to your work, Anya, and I really like this distinction you made about different kinds of people that we come across when recruiting people into Facebook ads. That phase we have, people we reach with our campaign. Some of them see the ads a few times, so we talk about the impressions. But these are people, Facebook scrollers. They may never really pay attention to the ad. There are some people who express a little bit of the interest into the campaign that may click on the ad, but what happens next, it also depends on many things. And then the final people, those who we are really interested in, are people who convert to become our respondents. In our case, there was more stages of selection, in a sense that there were also the screening questions I discussed, that some people were not eligible. So probably we had more traffic, but then the responses were lower than if we had a survey for all Polish people in UK. And the final note to the couple of bullet points which are at the end, that there were also some people who were eligible to take part in the survey, were essential workers, clicked on the consent, went through eligibility questions, but then didn't answer, like maybe stopped answering the questionnaire after answering 2 or 3 questions because something happened or decided that this is boring or something. So there were some participants who were not engaged, so we could count them as unit non-response. So the final people who answered the questionnaire are our valid respondents. And this flow chart summarizes these numbers. So on the Facebook side, we had over 3,000 unique clicks. But then on our Qualtrics side, on the survey, it was 1,300. So 2,000 less people were registered by our survey because they, after looking at the first page, they didn't take an action. So they didn't went to the next page, which was a concert page. And among those who decided to move to the second page and give consent or not, about 80 dropped out, either selected no consent, I don't want to take part, or didn't make any selection. And a few next pages were the eligibility questions, and at this stage, altogether about 500 people dropped out because they either didn't reply to one of the eligibility questions, or it turned out they were not eligible. So our final eligible participants were 864 people, and out of them, over 100 really didn't leave many responses. So we had a sample of 735 people being our respondent, like the valid respondent. Going back to another long table, just wanted to demonstrate to you how aggressive was the campaign overall. So the first column is the actual reach of the campaign that I discussed before. And then we also get statistics on impressions. So we can calculate the frequency, how many times participants had a chance to see our ad. And we can see that in England, on average, it was 4 times. And outside England, it was really high, over 9 times. So because we had a larger budget on the smaller population, then the ad was really displayed many, many times for some of these people to reach to them. Although the final sample was smaller in the rest of the UK, the respondent was much more expensive, 2.5 times more expensive than in England. So the price for England, you can see, is £1.50, and the price outside England is £3.50. But this is something probably quite common. If the population is smaller, you have to place more resources. Moving on now to how it evolved over time. When you start Facebook, recruiting through Facebook, it's always a sort of a new journey because you don't know what other ads you're competing with, how this time the population will react. So we also were experiencing some unexpected events, and we observing how the campaign was evolving over time, we realized after the first few days that, oh, we have loads of responses, but most of them come from women. So I mentioned to you that we didn't use the gender as one of the variable in our ad set. And then quite quickly, we felt that the algorithm learned that women were more likely to click and were much more likely that the ad was showing to more and more women over time. So after 1 week, we decided to switch off sampling women. We kept the same ad campaign, but we just changed one of the variables of how participants were targeted within the ad. So for over something like 10 or 11 days, we targeted only men. Then towards the end of the originally planned 3 weeks, we felt like, oh, now we know roughly how much we have to spend on this, our intermediary marketing company. So we felt like we can use the remaining funds £300 to our ad set. And at the stage, we also decided to extend the campaign to have a little bit more time to see how it's been evolving and allow the algorithm to learn and target new population. And there was another one final revision that, because we found some extra budget, which was on my side at the university, we added it to the final 3 days of the campaign. And we thought that maybe this extra injection of budget will help with recruitment, because maybe we will reach a new population. But you see how it goes. How did it go in a minute? So I added the stages of our campaign as these red lines and a short description. So, it's a lot of information to take in this presentation. So the first stage was when we targeted all genders within a 3-week campaign. Then it was still a 3-week campaign, but targeted only men. Then we extended it to 4 weeks campaign, added a little bit of a budget, and then in the final few days added this extra over 200 again. So this is a daily reach. So we can see that the reach dropped out significantly in the stage 3, because probably we extended the campaign, and that's why the statistics went down for this. But it picked up again when we added much more budget in stage 4. This graph represents again daily reach, but the reddish lines are for England, bluish for rest of the UK. So you can see that rest of the UK picked up a little bit more reach in this 2 final stages of the campaign, in the stage 2 and 3. But before that, especially in the stage 1, it was roughly similar reach across both. So what what does it mean for clicks? But as you can see, the reach increased at the end of the campaign, but people really didn't click more often. And then in comparison, especially to the successful first phase of sampling, when we sampled everybody. So it was picking up a little bit at the beginning of stage 3 and 4, but not so much as we would expect with this additional budget and so on. And when we look at this graph across ad sets, it's a little bit messy. It's like, can't see like a very clear trend. So probably there's some chaos and random random more clicks by different ad sets, people in different ad sets, but we can't see any pattern. Maybe just a little bit of at the end, a little bit more people outside the UK with this extra budget started to click with us. And the final, in this flow of our interaction with Facebook user, whether it's important whether they became a respondent. So if we compare, we could see here clearly that for both regions, the campaign again was very successful. At the first stage, in the middle stage, when we recruited only men, in both regions, the campaign, we felt like it almost died. So it was not working very well among male participants on Facebook, and it picked up again, but probably mostly due to women being added in a stage 3, and again picked up a little bit in a stage 4. So discussing a little bit more the gender bias. Well, we don't really know how many. What's the proportion of women within Polish migrants and social workers? In our sample, it was 67% women. There are some statistics for the different nationalities, all essential workers in the UK, that it's 60%, but we don't know, what should be the proportion. So we don't know how far away we are with this. And, maybe it's just better to look at any of the statistics separately for men and women at this stage. If we create them. And when we sampled men only in the second stage, you can see that this is where we mostly get male participants to our sample. It was 2/3 of male participants in our survey in the Facebook sample came from the stage 2. So it feels like, oh, actually, these are 2 different populations of Facebook behaving differently. So when we sampled only men, the algorithm worked much better. And this also translated into respondents. And later in stage 3 and 4, as you will see in the graphs I will show in a minute, men were increased reach among men. There were some clicks, but they somehow didn't translate into respondents in this stage 3 and 4. So now the same graphs of reach, clicks, and respondents by gender. So you can see that the campaign had really good reach among men in this middle. In the second phase when we only targeted them. But whenever we had men with women, somehow, the algorithm worked in favor of women all the time. For clicks, again, there is a discrepancy. Men were less likely to click, which reflects experiences of different kinds of recruitment for different kinds of research, that it's more easier to recruit female participants. And then finally, when we look at the respondents by gender, it was really poorly going, not very well, as I said, in these 2 final stages. Not many respondents who were men for some reason. So this graph just summarizes as a bar chart this information. You can see that in the first phase and in the last phase, it was 75% who were women. And this proportion, it's interesting that this proportion reflects the proportion in our convenience sampling. So it feels like when you sample both men and women, it's really similar to any kinds of convenience sampling without having this ad sets or separate sampling within gender. Still, we could say that the overrepresentation of women was a little bit better, a little bit better among the Facebook ad, if we believe that this is closer to the actual population, but we're not really sure what's the actual proportion of the population. So to summarize the stage on sampling, our experience confirmed what I think the previous presentation was saying, that the smaller the sample, the more difficult it is to recruit. It's more expensive. You have to place more budget on a smaller population, like we did on the rest of the UK. And there's still something, we're trying to understand better why in these final stages men almost withdrew from the campaign, although I think the reach was still fairly good. They didn't click or didn't become a respondent. So is it because the lack of interest, or maybe they decided that they are not, after clicking on the ad, reading the first page, maybe they thought, oh, this is essential workers, it's not for me. And as with any of this campaign, you never know, after you change something in the algorithm, sometimes it's good to redefine the algorithm so it reaches a new population, but maybe this redefinition in the stages 3 or 4 changed in our, in the negative way for what we wanted to achieve. Yeah, and the final 5 minutes I think I have, because I have a clock going, it's 36.7 minutes now, so maybe something 5 minutes I want to use to talk a little bit about equality. If maybe I'll drop a couple of slides to give Anna more time to summarize. So I talked a lot about, the reach of the Facebook ads and a little bit of the clicks and respondents, but also we can look within the respondents and think about, okay, so what all the stages and division into ad set mean for our quality of the sample. So I've done a few things. The people who are eligible to take part, divided them into 3 groups. Unit non-response, so these were people who didn't respond to at least 60% of the questions. People who we can call a little bit more reluctant participants, respondents, so who didn't respond between 1% and 40% of the core questions. Core questions, I mean questions who were asked to everybody in the survey, and then this ideal respondents who answered all questions. When when we look at the statistics of by the number of this different kinds of respondents, so the red line represents the conversions, people who clicked and gave us consent to take part in the research. Then we have different kinds of participants. It's hard to see now the pattern. We just see that the campaign was sort of fading, especially in these two first phases, and picked up a little bit again. So I created another table. Yeah, another table when we look at the campaign outcomes, and the top part are just actual numbers, but the part that tells you more the information is the part on the bottom. So if we think that the actual reach of our campaign was 100, then 3.59 people within this first ad set actually clicked on our ad. So the click rate was higher among the younger in England, and then also younger in the rest of the UK, and the oldest. But when we look at the conversion, so these are people who actually moved into the consent, to the consent page and gave us consent, we can see that it was similar across both ad sets, that we have the younger participants in both regions, England and outside England, who are most, like the conversion rate was the highest. Overall, it was a little bit higher outside England. And then looking at the participants who were eligible and became our respondent, again, it was the higher rate in relation to the population who we reached with the campaign. Now zooming in a little bit into the, only looking at the conversions, the people who moved to the consent page of we can see, again, this 6 bars represent this 6 different ad sets. In both regions, England and outside England, these 2 younger ad sets, actually the outcome of these conversions were quite similar. A little bit over 50 people became our respondents, either reluctant or engaged respondent. You can see that the black color is larger among 40+ in both regions. So it means that this population of 40+ people were more likely to click and don't do anything, not give consent, just read the information about the project. Another big table, but just to summarize it quickly, the same information on campaign outcomes in comparison to our Facebook reach for each for different stages. You can see that, you know, the conversion rate and the click rate is much higher in this first stage than in the later stages, followed by stage number 3, where we added again the woman. So campaign was more successful again in the first stage. And this is again looking just at the conversions, which clearly shows that something not good happened in the final stage. When we reached this additional population, they really didn't become our respondent in the same rate as in the stages 1, 2, and 3. So it could be maybe the stage was too short to really make the algorithm work properly. Just to reiterate my point that in the stage number 1, when we recruited everybody, we had 54 respondents a day, much more than in later stages. So cost was much cheaper in this first week of the campaign. And then when we look only at the respondents, a higher percentage of them responded to all questions, so were more reliable respondents. And to wrap up, maybe I will not go through this couple of graphs just to give Anya time to summarize. I compared also in these 2 graphs non-responses among the convenience sample and Facebook ad sample. And Facebook ad sample seems to be doing a little bit better in comparison to the convenience sample. Okay, so Anya, go back to you. I think we have to finish in a couple of minutes now.
Yes, thank you, Aneta. I'm aware of time. Anya, if you could switch me off whenever you need me to switch off. So in the final couple of minutes, just a few words about the positives, about the challenges and the key lessons learned. Can I have the next slide, Aneta? So the positives, it was overall a success. We had an unexpectedly large sample. We had good quality responses overall. We also collected some qualitative material through the survey as well, something we didn't really expect. One of our questions was an open question, and survey participants were quite generous in writing responses to the open question, and gained a lot of experience in recruiting harder to reach population. And by harder, we mean not only a population who are, migrant population in a country, but also migrant population within specific sectors. Next slide, please. But there were also some challenges. We were working with an intermediary, and this always bears some challenges. Not all of our requests were picked up immediately or correctly. A lot of communication via email was going on. We also noted that our campaign created this unwanted space for conspiracy theories, as I mentioned. If you were listening carefully, you might have noted that I mentioned 4 types of responses to our Facebook ads, but I didn't actually mention the last type, which was hateful and malicious, sort of online hate, online trolls. Kind of responses. We were exposed to that, quite a lot of this. We took a decision not to show these responses in this talk, but it can be overwhelming, it can be emotional, it can be demotivating to the extent that we actually decided not to engage with these comments, not to even read them, because some of them were pretty hateful. And there was also some misreading of our ads. Next slide, please, Aneta. And this is the final slide. What we have done differently. Well, we would first of all run 2 different sampling pilots separate from the main fieldwork. I'm sure Aneta will be able to discuss this in Q&A in more detail. We would try to maximize resources, in particular, make our ad campaign shorter, secure a larger budget, perhaps more ad sets as well. We would definitely approach the intermediary earlier in the process. We didn't really realize how much communication this would require, how much time investment this would require. We would also try to find perhaps an intermediary with some experience of promoting for research, not only for marketing purposes, so that we could be always, on the same page. Sometimes we felt that we had to explain our decisions. They didn't, some of our requests didn't make sense for them, but made perfect sense for us as researchers. I guess we would like to have more control over the Facebook ad campaign. So as you know, we worked with an intermediary. This poses challenges. Perhaps next time we would do it on our own. And finally, we're all probably aware that, online hate happens all the time, but you really need to be prepared to the extent of these negative comments, to the extent of criticism that you might get with Facebook advertising. And I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sorry for running over time, but
Oh, no, that's totally fine. Don't worry. We also started a few minutes late, obviously. No, but this is great. It's fantastic to get to see research in action, right? To really just you sharing your experience and explaining these are the steps we took. This is what happens, because I think this is incredibly helpful for a lot of people who start out, like you, right, of using these tools, and who might face exactly the same challenges and questions. And it's good to see what happened to your project and data collection. So thanks so much for sharing all this. Of course, we were now also interested in seeing what you actually find, but that is for another talk. But fascinating study, obviously. Maybe just to kind of start out with this, somebody asked, just maybe quickly why, you know, focusing on Polish population, and you know, maybe going into more detail about, like, you know, do you think that so Lucy Porter asked that, do you think that the photos you used, you know, could actually have also excluded some Polish people, to, you know, that you then yeah, kind of they felt like they're not kind of you know, identified with the ads, and therefore this might have also had effect on your sample. Yeah.
Shall I take this one, Aneta? So first of all, thank you for your questions. Fantastic to see so much engagement. In regards to the choice of Polish population, first of all, because this is the largest non-UK nationality, we also had evidence that Poles are employed across a range of different sectors and roles, and because of that are a really good population, national population for quantitative analysis. So that was another reason too. We had, you know, evidence from different sources that there's, for example, lots of Polish essential workers working in specific sectors. So just as the pandemic started, there were 10,000 Polish workers in the NHS only. So this gives you an idea of, you know, the Polish migrants are actually working in these key sectors. So these were the key reasons that we decided to engage with this population. Did the ads exclude any Polish people? I mean, there's always risk of that. It might have excluded some. You saw some of the negative comments. Some people felt perhaps that the ads weren't targeting higher skilled migrant essential workers to the same degree, and they were perhaps disappointed with that. However, Aneta, you have a better understanding of the final survey. We had a good spread across different education level in the end, right?
Yeah, I don't remember the location. Because we haven't don't have a blog about it, but for the sectors we had quite a good, and when we compared the sector spread for, again, all key workers in UK, it was fairly similar, except one group which probably is more popular among migrants. Yeah, so yeah, this is something to do. And again, for the final section, when I was talking about the survey quality or sampling quality, is it possible to talk about the representativeness of this Facebook ad-generated samples? You know, this is a specific kind of a sampling when it's hard to achieve a representative sample with your actual population, because this is only a population of Facebook. So this is something to do in the next steps, to think a bit more about different kind of maybe comparisons to do with different across different demographics.
Yeah, maybe just following up on this, I would like to take Zaza's question here about, you know, quality checks, and in particular, you know, like you are targeting a very specific group here. How can you actually make sure that, you know, you have the right people there? You know, could there be potential interference in your survey by kind of trolls or fake interviews, these kind of things? Are you worried about this? This is something you can check. And maybe related to this, you mentioned at the beginning that you had your ad, of course, in like kind of Polish and English, but did you allow the questionnaire also to be in Polish or in English? Could they choose? How did you do that? Because that could, of course, also help, right, with making sure that it's not just like people maybe who want to pick up a voucher to kind of, you know, randomly go through a survey. But did you have any checks on this? Yeah.
I just copied, if anyone wants to see the questionnaire, it's still like a preview version online. So you can switch, I don't know, am I still sharing the screen? Yeah. Yes. So I think you can see the questionnaire now. So people could switch, and then the Polish version was the default for the Facebook ads, and all questions were in 2 languages. But the check we discussed, yeah.
Do you know how many people did answered the survey in Polish and in English?
Over 90% in Polish.
Okay, yeah.
I don't remember now the 90, maybe 2 or 3 in Polish. On the Facebook ad, probably most of them in Polish because it was automatically on as a Polish one.
Okay.
Yeah, but the check, it's sort of related to the question how you defined eligibility, because we discussed first, maybe we should just say, oh, if they self-define as essential workers, should they become our participants? But many people, especially if you translate this word into Polish, it doesn't so much make sense as the English word. Many people wouldn't say they're essential workers at all, although they were. Yeah, so this is a difficult question. I think we didn't have any sort of this kind of check except these 3 eligibility questions. So in theory, anyone could click and decide. I've just done some cross-validation across some questions to see if there was any contradictory responses on a couple of them. Then I would exclude these participants, but we haven't done anything more.
Yeah. Can I add to that? So we've mentioned the open question at some point, and we had quite a successful response rate to the open questions. So from the open questions, we could see that these were actually, valid people. They were reflecting on, on their experience, and the responses to the open questions, Aneta, is it over 350, right? So even based on that, someone put a lot of effort into, discussing their situation, and some of these stories are quite powerful, are quite, emotional. So from that, we would, assume that, these are actually not trolls, but people just sharing their experience. But we realize that in some cases, this is unavoidable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so over 1,000 left the emails, and we had 1,100.
Yeah,
so maybe does it mean the 100 is not valid? No.
So we also kind of thought that perhaps trolls wouldn't necessarily leave their emails for contact, but again, cannot exclude.
There was actually an interesting question. I think that was I don't know, was that Sean who had several questions as well about how did you ensure that people who might have come through to you through the convenience sample didn't also complete the survey through the Facebook ads? Is that like...
Oh, but the ad would leave a cookie, or the questioner would leave a cookie that you took part in the questionnaire. So I think if they clicked, they would be excluded, which had a sort of a good and bad side, because people, as I said, there was many responses that people would just go through the questionnaire without answering the question, thinking, oh, I will just have a look first at the question and do it later. Yeah. But then it already remember, oh, you've done the questionnaire, so they wouldn't allow them to redo it.
I mean, there's a timer on Qualtrics for this, right? So I think you can set how long people are able to go back. So I think we played with this a bit as well. At the beginning, we had it open for like a week, but then we realized then once you close the survey, you have to wait a week for all those that have not answered. So we reduced that. But yeah, absolutely sure. And so in case you're using Qualtrics in the same way that Anna and Aneta and their team have done, they call it the balance stuffing function. So it creates cookies, and you cannot, it remembers your browser. And so therefore that will not be possible. Yeah.
Yes, but there's a risk that someone can use a different device, so take the survey from different devices a couple of times, but this would require a little bit of effort.
Yeah. But people may delete cookies, someone or that. I don't know how, I think you can like clear your browser or something, and if you want the voucher very much, fill in the questionnaire a few times, I guess.
Yeah, there's a few questions by Sean Rahu. So I don't know whether you kind of want to go through this a bit. So you had kind of questions on the go. So is there a possibility that the personal information from the mini survey could be relinked with the main survey by matching the start and end time? So I mean, I'm not sure, you talked about kind of matching, matching responses. Then is that because of your qualitative work that you did with some of the respondents, or?
Yeah, so our ethics committee requested that these 2 surveys are separate. So originally we had one long survey with at the end the questions about the leave your email address and contact information. But as I think Sean notes, if you tried very much, probably you could link some participants because the end and start time of the other one would be similar, but we wouldn't do it. And I think that the questionnaire with once we downloaded it for Qualtrics, the one with the personal information lives on a different drive on the Glasgow OneDrive.
Something that you could probably try. Again, Qualtrics is such a powerful program. Qualtrics creates a unique person ID for every survey, and so you can save, of course, the ID in both data sets, right? To kind of potentially then also link back between, get rid of the email addresses, but you could link back with using that ID variable that Qualtrics generates automatically. But again, that kind of maybe goes into a different direction. We're not here to talk about Qualtrics. Let me just try to kind of pick up the ones that are, there's a few questions generally about kind of your approach of also using, the gender, the decision not to have gender specific ads, and how this of course could have, so Sean asked about this, but also Emmanuel asked about this. Could it, in hindsight, do you think it could have helped to maybe just start out with this? That's what we usually did. We had much more fine-grained, we did gender, age, and education sub ads sets, for each of these groups, and that worked quite well. You have more control over this, but maybe because you played with this, right, and you left women out and so on. So in hindsight, would you say it might have been better, or is that one of the regrets maybe, or you think?
Yeah, I think also in your surveys you had larger populations, national larger populations. In our case, we were worried that with a smaller sample of Polish workers, especially outside England, if we have the tiny groups to target with 12 ad sets, that we didn't know at this stage. I think quite often you start this Facebook ad campaign, so you don't know whether I will have 100 or 200 or 300 people. So we didn't want to risk it, that we would fail. So we decided to leave gender out. But now thinking about the first week, how it quickly started picking up mostly women because they were most likely to click. Probably now I would also look after starting this sort of research with more budget, as we summarize in the final slides. Because also when we started it over a year ago, there were, the research by Stefan and maybe some other people, but many of the previous research were on much larger populations. So the people would be successful in recruiting participants with 500 euros. And we thought, so with 500 euros, we could also do something maybe similar without at this stage, maybe knowing that with Polish migrants being a few or several times smaller population, actually you need more budget. So I think it was we were just cautious at this time, and probably, as I say, next time we do it, we would probably do an excellent survey.
Yeah. No, it's a trade-off. We definitely saw that in our work as well, that the smaller the target potential audience, the more expensive it gets. And of course, that's a trade-off. Absolutely, you're totally right there. Given the time, maybe just kind of to pick up on Ying's question about how your ad is presented to the audience, and whether you kind of mentioned very specifically what this is about, or what you're interested in. What's your outcome, what's a dependent variable, and whether this might have biased your sample to draw in specific type of people. Maybe it drew in the kind of conspiracy COVID people, or do you think that are you worried about something like this, and did you actually mention very specifically what you're interested in as an outcome?
Well, our answer were only, do you live in UK, and would you like to tell us what COVID had an impact on your life?
Yeah, it was
the whole survey. Yeah, the survey was about different kinds of impacts. We didn't went through the topics about social life, economic, labor market, etc. So sort of probably we mentioned the dependent variable in this sense.
I mean, I guess mentioning COVID might have drawn in specific types. It could be. Yeah. I mean, we definitely found that we played a bit with this in our work, because maybe some of those who have followed the series now in the second session in the autumn, we talked about ad content, and we did find that if you mention the content of the survey, so in your case COVID, in our case politics, it biases a bit the sample. And I mean, I don't know how in your case how
Yeah.
in another direction, but you might have missed people who were not really affected by COVID, right? Who were like, oh, cool, whatever, you know, my life is like, you know, I always work from, I don't know. But yeah, it's a difficult question to answer, because you didn't vary your.
Yeah, would have to run 2 separate ad campaigns, one mentioning COVID, one. Yeah, and then still we would be playing with 2 different samples. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's exactly what we did, and we did find that mentioning politics and the ad itself drew in much more interested people and more partisan people. So maybe Ying, that answers partly your question. Okay, I will probably just leave it here, because we are a bit over, and I don't want to kind of you know, like draw this out too much. We try to kind of keep it to an hour, but fascinating project, and thanks really so much for sharing all your experiences with us. I'm sure that quite a few people, you know, kind of facing similar questions of what you faced when you did your data collection. I would definitely encourage you to use the Ads Manager yourself. It is not that difficult. You know, don't use the intermediary. You don't really need that. And we put together our handbook and also the 2 videos that we did in the beginning to really talk you through. And it's a relatively, I mean, I don't know. But I could you're the one who programs it usually.
It was after we've done our survey, your handbook.
I know,
so
I know.
Sorry.
But it really, it's a relatively good program to kind of take you through, and hopefully with our handbook and the videos, it will be easy to do the next time. Because I agree, for me, one of the advantages of doing the research that you're doing or that we're doing is it's hands-on. You have control over it, right? If you go to a survey company, you kind of, you know, hand over a lot of the things, and there's a lot of black box when it comes to sampling. You don't really know what they're doing. They just give you some data in the end, and it's an interesting experience to kind of really do it yourself. Yeah, that's an encouragement for everyone, of course, who's interested in this. Yeah, thanks very much. And for everyone who's still here, we have another seminar next Tuesday. So we're a bit on a roll here. We have Ingmar Weber, who will talk about Facebook advertisement audience estimates. So Anna and Annette already showed us some of these stats, and Ingmar will go into more detail about how to use them directly for your research. So do come back next Tuesday for more. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.